All right, let's talk about mergers. You know, when giant companies spend trillions of dollars to get even bigger. But here's the real question. Does bigger actually mean better? We're going to dig into the evidence and find out if these massive deals are really worth it.
To get a sense of the scale we're talking about, just look at this number, $2.4 trillion. That's not the total of all time. That was the value of global M&A deals in just 1 year. I mean, that kind of money completely reshapes the entire corporate world. And that brings us right to the heart of the matter. You know, the whole idea behind a merger is that 1 + 1 = 3, right? But does it? Do these massive buyouts actually create a stronger, more profitable company? That's the trillion-dollar question we are unpacking today.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the market's instant reaction to a deal. Then, we'll dive into the long-term reality. After that, we'll decode the hidden forces behind it all. And finally, we'll try to piece together an M&A success equation. All right, first up, M&A, the billion-dollar question. From the moment a deal is announced, there's a fundamental contradiction in how we measure its success. M&A deals are these huge, industry-shaking events. I mean, think about it. Of the original Fortune 500 companies from way back in 1955, only about 70 are still around today. A ton of them just got swallowed up by mergers. But here's the thing. The second a deal is announced, two totally different stories start to unfold. You've got the story the stock market tells in the first few days, and then you have the company's actual financial story years down the road. And believe me, those two stories, they rarely line up.
So let's start with that first story, the market's immediate gut reaction. How does Wall Street, or really any stock market, react right when a big merger is announced?
Okay, so to figure this out, researchers use this really clever tool called an event study. Think of it like this. You want to know if a new fertilizer makes a plant grow taller, but you also have to account for sunlight and rain, right? An event study does the same thing for a stock. It filters out all the general market noise, the ups and downs of the whole economy, so you can isolate the specific jump or dip caused by the merger announcement. What you're left with are the abnormal returns.
And what they find often looks a lot like this. This chart comes from a study of deals in East Africa, and you can see a clear positive stock bump in the first few days right after a deal gets announced. The message here seems pretty straightforward. In the short term, the market gets excited. Investors see a ton of potential, and they start buying, pushing the price up.
So if you only looked at this initial reaction, you'd think M&A is a clear win for shareholders, right? The market loves the idea, the stock goes up, end of story? Well, not quite.
And this is where the plot thickens. What happens after all that initial hype dies down and the real hard work of smashing two companies together actually begins? This is the fundamental disconnect. On the one hand, you have the market's initial reaction, which is often super positive. But on the other hand, you have the company's actual long-term performance. You know, its real profitability, its sales numbers. And that, well, that tells a much, much less rosy story. When you look at the long-term evidence, the picture changes dramatically. Study after study finds that profitability often just doesn't improve after a merger. In some cases, the return on sales actually goes down. And remember those positive stock returns we just saw? Turns out they're incredibly short-lived. They often just vanish or even turn negative after only a few days. So this creates our central mystery. Why is there such a massive gap between the short-term hype and the long-term reality?
To solve this mystery, we've got to start decoding the hidden forces that really decide whether a merger is going to sink or swim.
So what is going on here? What's causing this major disconnect? Why does the market get it so wrong so often, right at the beginning? Well, the research points to a combination of powerful forces that are usually invisible to the casual observer. Okay, hidden force number one, the investors themselves. It turns out the type of shareholder a company has can totally shape its M&A strategy. For example, if a company has a lot of foreign institutional investors, they tend to push for bigger, more ambitious cross-border deals. Long-term investors, they're all about gaining full control. And if there are a lot of short-term investors in the mix, well, that's often linked to less disciplined and, frankly, value-destroying decisions.
So the bottom line here is simple. Who owns the stock really, really matters. Shareholders aren't just sitting on the sidelines. Their priorities and timelines are a powerful influence on the kinds of deals that get made.
Next up, hidden force number two, the rules. We're talking about the legal system. This is fascinating.
Countries with a common law system, think the US and the UK, tend to see a lot more M&A deals, but the price paid for control is usually lower. On the flip side, in civil law countries like France and Germany, you see fewer deals overall, but when a deal does happen, the acquirer has to pay a much higher premium for control. And that's largely because those legal systems offer more protection to existing shareholders.
All right, our third hidden force is something called psychic distance. And no, this has nothing to do with geography. It's about all those intangible gaps, differences in language, culture, business customs that make it incredibly difficult for a company in one country to truly understand a target company in another. It's like a kind of static that prevents information from flowing smoothly.
And here's how that distance plays out in a real deal. When there's a high psychic distance, it creates a ton of uncertainty. The seller just knows more than the buyer, plain and simple. So what's the logical response for the buyer? You limit your risk. Instead of going all in on a full takeover, they'll often just buy a smaller initial stake to test the waters.
And finally, our fourth hidden force, the place. By that, I mean the target country's government and its institutions. How effective is that government? How well does it create and enforce rules? This basically acts as a gatekeeper. Countries with strong, stable institutions make it way easier to get deals done. But if the institutions are weak or unpredictable, they can create so many hurdles that the deal dies before it even gets off the ground.
So, after all that, what's the big picture here? Let's try to put all these pieces together and build a final M&A success equation.
The key message from all this research is pretty clear. Whether a merger actually creates value isn't just a coin flip. It's more like an equation. And the most important variables in that equation are often the ones hiding in plain sight.
So here it is, the M&A success equation. To really understand if a deal has a chance, you have to look past the flashy price tag and ask some deeper questions. Who are the investors driving this thing? What legal system is it operating under? How big is that cultural and linguistic gap? How stable is the host country? And maybe most importantly, what are we even measuring? Are we looking at the short-term market hype or the long-term health of the actual business?
So, the next time you see a mega merger hitting the headlines, don't just ask how much it's worth. Instead, ask yourself, what's hiding in plain sight? What are the invisible forces at play here? Thanks for digging into this with us.